My guest today is Brad Crawford. Brad is a U.S. Army veteran who volunteers in Ukraine as a combat advisor and trainer, helping to rebuild and train Ukrainian military units. Today, we discuss training the Ukrainian Army, drones, battlefield adaption, lessons learned from this war, and more. Okay, let's go.
Conflict, politics, military-industrial complex, technology, war. The Flash Traffic Podcast.
I like your haircut.
Thanks. It's very convenient. Yeah. So how's everything going? You're
You got your up days and you got your down days, man. And you got your really dangerous days and you got your really boring days. So
yeah.
That's the way it is here.
Why don't you describe what you do and how you do it? But first, what do you do there volunteer-wise in training?
Okay. Yeah, ever since 2022, our team's been on the ground here. And basically what we're doing is we're doing an ad hoc kind of an SFAB combat advisor mission here with a bunch of volunteers. We kind of take that theory and that practice and we put it in the application. We've helped assist and advise 22 brigades here in Ukraine. We've also worked with 3 major training centers. I've had the unique distinction, and it was very, very good of them to work with the General Staff of Ukraine, the J7. We did a special project for training, actually making better instructor courses for them, and working on improving their instructor training. And I've had the opportunity to go to some of the academies here to do some guest speaking. Went to the National Defense University of Ukraine and worked with some of the senior non-commissioned officers of the Ukrainian Army, all the way up to the enlisted senior advisor of Ukraine. He was actually in the briefing, and that was very interesting to see him there. And he was very happy to see me, and he thanked me, and I appreciated that. But we work with these combat brigades, and we work with these training centers. And our primary mission is to do what an SFAB mission is. So we advise, train, and assist these forces, both by building up their combat power through doing like specialized training with platoons and companies, all the way down to building up the instructors. And right now, most of our main focuses right now have been training Ukrainian instructors, because as you know, that actually builds combat power a lot more, because if we can train instructors to train the trainers, or what we call training the trainers, we can actually build up their capacity to train more people. Every instructor that we trains between 50 and 60 people a month. So if we put that into perspective, and we're training 20 or 30 instructors from a brigade with one of these instructor courses that we do, there's some pretty big numbers coming out of that for allowing these guys to actually get up there and actually make a big difference on the battlefield. One of the things that Ukraine definitely needs assistance on is training, because, we have to train a good number of people. There's a lot of things I can't say, specific numbers and stuff like that, because of OPSEC. I don't want to give the enemy any advantage by knowing any forms of information like that. But there's thousands and thousands of soldiers every month that need to be trained here in Ukraine. And that is our primary mission and purpose of assisting them in training. So one last thing on the NT. We do this on a voluntary basis. We work as unpaid volunteers here. We've been doing that ever since the war started. I'm a retired Army guy, I think, just like yourself. Pay me a pretty good pension, and we self-support a lot of the things we're doing here through, a lot of us. And it's just an honor to be here with these guys. So.
How many trainers do you have on average?
Now, we've had anywhere from the start of the war, we've had up to 10 or 15 trainers on the team, down to low points where we have 4 trainers. And a 4-man team is not that's 4 trainers. That doesn't include the interpreters that we need, the support staff that we have. We have about 5 or 6 guys that work back in the United States, helping us out with a lot of different things as well. So at any given point in time, the numbers can change. It could be anywhere from 4. It could be anywhere from 4 to 10. A lot of these guys, when they come over here to advise and assist, they stay here for about 3 to 6 months, and then they go home. And then we get a new batch of guys in. So it's dependent on the mission and kind of things over the last couple of years. I'm not saying that support of Ukraine's going down or anything, but we're seeing it's harder to get for some of these volunteer organizations that I talk to get donations, volunteers to come over and stuff like that. But we're doing pretty good on that aspect. We're keeping at least a pretty good A team up there so we can go out there and advise and assist.
So you think that the general interest from the West in Ukraine has been decreasing gradually as the war drags on? People, short attention span, at least in the West. You think that has impacted your volunteers that come over and your contributions?
Yeah. One thing, we don't solicit donations. We have a donations tab on our webpage if anybody would like to donate, but we never solicit donations through DMs or message people or ask on our pages for donations. But what I'm talking about is I'm in touch with a lot of different organizations out there that actually do donations, and I'm following a lot of these guys on X, and they're having a very difficult time. A lot of these guys meeting these donation goals that they're setting, and volunteers. A lot of these volunteer organizations out there, I see them always asking for volunteers, and some people are starting to get a little frustrated about it. But in my professional opinion, being here, I have seen, and I kind of call this kind of war fatigue a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's been talked about so much and said so much in the West. And then also, one thing I don't like doing is getting into politics, but this has been a very politically charged thing now with both sides talking about the issue. I think that has detrimental effects on what's going on here as well. And I think both of those factors definitely put things into kind of a downward aspect from what we've actually seen since the start.
Yeah, I think that's just in general gradual decline, not simply because of the Trump administration, which accelerated the detriment to Ukraine, but just naturally as the war drags on. Even Ukrainians are getting war fatigue. They're tired, and just a natural human nature thing. Talking specifically about the training, what do you guys do there? Like, do you do trench warfare, drone training, leadership training? Can you talk a little bit about the actual on the ground stuff?
Sure, absolutely. So a normal training process would kind of go like this. We get invited to a brigade or a training center by the commander, or maybe deputy commander, or maybe even like a deputy commander of training. We'll go up there, and what we'll do is we'll just have an initial interview with these guys and just kind of talk about, okay, what are you guys looking for? We got to, it's kind of like, I call it like a buffet list, the stuff that we give them. We say, okay, here's what we're specialized in. Here's the things that we can train. And then what we try to do is we don't start working with them immediately. And what I do with the commanders is I say, what I'd like to do, sir, is I'd like to spend at least a week with you guys, just observing, taking some notes, watching the training that you guys are already doing, kind of watching the instructors, seeing how you guys are doing things. And then what I'd like to do after that week, I'd like to just take some time out of your schedule and bring you these notes and observations that I have, and actually come back and then make some recommendations. And then based on those recommendations, your final approval or whatever you'd like to do, that's how we will go about this. So we're working straight under the commander. When we go to these units, and this has been talked about a couple times here, we actually get signed orders by these colonels and stuff. And it says that we're official military instructors working with these brigades. That covers us on the legality portion of that. And once we get that order, then we start work. And depending on what the brigade commander or the training commander has given us on guidance, that's where we start working. That's our focus point. If he wants us to start training instructors, then we start an instructor training program. If he wants us to do specific training that they cannot provide, we start doing that. But we focus on a lot of different things. We focus on your basic infantry stuff, basic training stuff, marksmanship on all levels of all kind of weapon systems, trench warfare, urban warfare, woodland combat, specialized engineering tasks. We actually, like I said before, we train instructors. So we do instructor training programs, both basic and advanced instructor training programs. And then we also work with like a staff level operations. So like if they're talking about like battalion level staff or brigade level staff, we'll help them on like their S1, their S3, S4. So like S1 like personnel, S2 intelligence, S3 operations, S4 logistics, S5. They actually kind of you don't want to see that too much, but like S6 communications. We'll just help kind of refine those things, work with them on little things like MDMP, military decision-making process, staff flow, okay? How does the CP look like? What's the flow of the CP? You know, is all the communications coming in clearly and correctly? Is everything published the way it should? Is all the staff functions, you know, symbiotically working together? These are all the kind of things that we do. But like I said before, it's based on the commander's intent and what the commander wants us to provide.
And obviously this must, ebb and flow depending on the expertise that you have with the volunteers at the time, right? So I'm sure you get some guys that are experts in maneuver infantry tactics, some guys that were staff officers or staff NCOs that know a lot about the MDMP process. Some guys that are comms guys. I'm sure that fluctuates. How do you get lessons learned and how do you capture those to gradually improve the training? Obviously, it must come from the field. How do you get those lessons and capture those?
That's a very good question you got there. So when we're working with these combat brigades and these training centers, they usually get like training circulars or like what we would call in America, like Army Center for Lessons Learned kind of stuff. So, the enemy always changes their tactics about every 90 days. The battlefield changes every 90 days. When we're training with the Ukrainians, we're not just training them. I got a notebook right here with probably 3 steno books in it, full of information. And what I do is when I'm out there, I got my little green book. And you can see this thing is just full of notes. And when I see something new, or I see the Ukrainians using some new tactics, techniques, or procedures, I'm sitting there with my pen and paper and I'm writing this stuff down. And what we do is we actually look at our training plans and our, the stuff that we're developing. And we'll actually spend maybe a week or two, I call this administrative time with the team. And we'll sit there and we'll actually like hone in and refine on our training to ensure that it's meeting the latest like enemy tactics, techniques, and procedures, that it's actually like relevant to the current battlefield situation. And we work hand in hand with our Ukrainian counterparts too. I have a lot of people on Signal that I talk to, and they actually do provide me some pretty good information from time to time. And I got a stack of Ukrainian manuals that's probably about this big. I'll send you a picture of it. Okay. And I'm sitting here with my cell phone, buddy, and I'm using Google Translate, and I'm just reading everything I can get my hands on. I spend a lot of my time on self-study, learning the Ukrainian ways of war, their ways of management with their army systems, logistics, and all these things. And that's kind of how we keep one step ahead with this. And we make sure that we give our Ukrainian counterparts, our full attention and make sure that our training is relevant.
Do you work with or communicate or have any connection to Center for Army's Lessons Learned or anyone back in the States that, this is a wealth of knowledge? Are they taking advantage of trainers and, expats in Ukraine? Because I know, talking to some people that are familiar with the Center for Army Lessons Learned, I think there was like 3 people assigned to capture lessons from Ukraine. Something ridiculously small. And I don't quote me on that. I don't know for sure how many people they have in Leavenworth doing this problem. But do you communicate with those guys or anything?
I've sent some messages back and forth to them, but primarily who I communicate through is our legislators. I usually go back home because I have a family I have to see. I spend about a month back home every year, usually around December. Last December, I actually went to Washington and I talked to many of our congressmen and our senators. And I spent some time down in the Hart building down there. I spent some time down in the Congressional Hall. And they were actually very, very interested in the things I had to say. It's, usually when you go talk to a staffer, they'll bring you in for about 15 minutes and they'll be like, all right, yeah, I got it. Thank you for coming. But when I walked in there and I was talking to a lot of these staffers, I had 3-4 staffers in the room and everybody's taking notes. And most of these meetings that I went to, we were sitting there for about an hour and a half talking about Ukraine, the things that Ukraine needs help with and all these other kind of things. That's what I kind of try to do on that side of the fence. It's kind of hard to get in touch with military representatives sometimes because there are rules and regulations regarding this, of course, especially with the current political situation, which I'm not talking about politics today. But, that's kind of how I engage with our leaders and try to work with them as well.
Yeah, I think as you're probably well aware, there is a dearth of understanding, not just knowledge and information, but just understanding about how the war ebb and flows, how it's changed. And like you said, every 3 months, every time I go back, it's a completely different war. And I go back maybe, 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. Every time I go back once a quarter, it's a completely different war. It's amazing. Like being able to go from Mykolaiv to Kherson, no problem this summer. Now they're FPV droning that highway. It's like little things like that, the landscape change. Taking a train in Ukraine used to be the safest thing in the world. It was a miracle how nice the trains ran in Ukraine. Now they have thermal Shaheds targeting passenger, trains at night. What I'm trying to say is I think there's a real lack of understanding with the U.S. Army at the very least of what's going on. And I'm sure there's guys at the War College, friends of mine, that would be like, no, we've got this. We're reading tons of stuff every day. I got that. But you must have seen the video that the Army produced on Twitter. That was, have you ever seen a drone drop a grenade? And that was like 4 months ago or 3 months ago, complete buffoonery. And that will go down as one of those army of one type snafus for PR.
Well, Anthony, when we talk about this, there's the evolution of drones has gotten to the point now where, Ukraine is in its 4th or 5th evolution of combat drones, attack drones. In the United States Army or the Western armies or NATO armies, they're still in Gen 1. They're still focusing on reconnaissance drones. There's not any talk of adding an offensive drone attack company or not attack company, but an attack unit to a company, a battalion, a brigade. None of that stuff. They're still thinking about just reconnaissance because they're trying to rely on our air dominance and superiority.
Right.
That doesn't work anymore. The Russians have some very good CDAD and or I just want to say this in simple terms so everybody understands. The Russians have some good surface-to-air missile capability, not to mention air-to-air missile capability. They're catching up on, where it comes to with this air defense. And they've always been pretty strong with air defense, to be quite honest with you. But the thing is, we cannot rely on air dominance to win a battle anymore. There's too many depending factors to that. And we have to understand that drone warfare is the new evolution. And it's going to be the determining factor on who wins a war or who doesn't, especially when we get to the point of artificial intelligence. The first side that figures out artificial intelligence and swarm theory meaning hundreds of these drones that can independently target weapon systems based on types. So, it would be like, all right, first we're going to find the anti-aircraft, then we're going to find the artillery, then we're going to find the tanks, then we're going to find the armored personnel carriers, then we're going to go for individual vehicles, then we're going to go for heavy weapons, then we're going to go for individual infantrymen. And these things can automatically think that in their mind and go straight to these targets. it's going to radically change warfare to the point where these multi-million-dollar weapon systems that we're developing, these tanks and armored vehicles and all that stuff, are going to become notionally, extinct. It's just my opinion on it.
And even if we, and I say this all the time, we're not going to fight like Ukrainians, but even if we don't fight like the Ukrainians, we being the West, at least small drones and drone proliferation is a force multiplier that we shouldn't ignore. At least we should pay attention to it and master it, because the level of understanding between the United States Army and the Ukrainian Army is just leagues difference. Ryan O'Leary, I had him on the podcast this past week. He was talking about the difference between 18-inch frame and 22-inch frame on an FPV, and having to do all the math of, if you have a 20-kilometer fiber optic cable, you have to change the batteries. And that level of expertise is just not found in Western armies. They're still relying on, let's pay a military industrial prime $100,000 to create an FPV-like drone. They just don't get it. They're relying on large corporations and firms to build very expensive drones, but that doesn't build expertise at the lowest tactical level, I think. That being said, how do you deal with the drone issue in training? Let's take trench warfare or in the defense, deliberate defense. How do you deal with that? Because I was in Germany maybe 4 months ago watching the Germans, train the Ukrainians, and they did not deal with the drone thing at all. I mean, there were no drones flying that I saw, partially because it's not very practical. I mean, I guess you could have FPV drones come in and just hit guys without an explosive, just try to hit them. But on the other side, they weren't at the level of training that would be any value added. They were basically assaulting a trench with a fire team. And I don't see how adding drone warfare into that would make it any more value added, because they're already focusing on, lanes of fire, when to throw a grenade, like very simple stuff. And adding grenade, like, how do you deal with the drone training issue?
Well, it's a crawl, walk, run approach, just like you just said. So we have to teach them the basic tactics first. Like if we're doing trench clearing, we got to teach them how to, maneuver to the trench. We have to teach them how to create a breach point to assault the trench. We have to teach them movement inside the trench, 2-man teams, 5 meters apart. We have to teach them, all these basic things. But until you can get the basics down, you can't really add all this other stuff in. Normally, how the Ukrainians do this, and what I've seen firsthand, they use these drone trainings for more like psychological training. So they'll actually have the drones, flying around the guys when they're doing marches back and forth. The guys will do anti-drone drills. They'll move to the position, go underneath the tree, each one, looking straight up, keeping super, like stealthy, trying not to be no movement, nothing like that, right? And the instructors, they'll have the, fake grenades, that like, strike ball grenades. And they'll drop them, and they'll teach these guys, by just sheer practice, just over and over again, how to do this. I have a pretty good video on my X page there where they actually created it's kind of a psychological training for this. They had the guys go inside the trench. They had like a big boombox speaker on the top of the trench. And it was like having the FPV sounds that were coming in. They were hitting, guys had, were kicking dirt inside every time like one of the, rounds actually hit to like simulate that. And then we had at the end, this to simulate a direct hit, right next to the door. The Ukrainians took a artillery simulator, one of ours, and they threw it right next to the door, and it created a, huge flash, huge boom, huge explosion. But the drone training is put inside the regular training. It's just, they don't really like do them concurrently most times, at least for the basic training. Now for the advanced training, when you're going to the, the brigade level, like areas or what we call training areas, the battle brigade training centers and stuff like that. They'll actually start putting both of these things together. And that's how it's done. I guess the way we could say it would be like a systematic approach, building from the bottom to the top. So there you go with that.
How do you do leadership training? Is it just basic MDMP staff work, or is there something specific that you do with their staff?
So we'll do like wargaming. So we'll set up a scenario. So I'll write like an operations order, okay? Or they'll write an operations order. And then what we'll do is we'll go through the full MDMP process. We'll pull out the maps. They'll start their mission planning. The staff sections will break away. They'll do their work. They'll come back. They'll brief the commander on the plan. Commander does his course of action analysis, figures out exactly what he wants to do, and then kind of what we'll do is we'll kind of war game it a little bit. That works out pretty good. Helps out with the staff flow, makes us understand things. And what I'm doing when we're doing that is I'm doing the OCT thing. I got my green book. I'm taking my notes, and at the end, we do our after action review. And we bring all the staff sections together. We'll do our after action review and, find out what went right, what went wrong, our three improves, our 3 sustains, and then we'll figure out our lessons learned and we'll implement those lessons. So
how is the language barrier? How do you work around that? Because a lot of Germans speak Russian, especially East Germans.
Mm.
And so they had kind of a workaround because, like I said, a lot of Ukrainians speak Russian and a lot of Germans speak Russian. So they had that advantage. How do you guys deal with the Ukraine? Do you teach in Russian, Ukrainian, both, Suzik? Like, how do you guys work around that?
All of our interpreters, we got 3 interpreters that we work with on a rotating basis pretty much. Every single one of our interpreters are very, very good with English, Russian, and Ukrainian. And they do a very good job. Normally, when I'm teaching a class or something like that, I'll throw one sentence out there. I have my interpreter right behind me on the right side. He's kind of looking through me. He'll say what he's got to say, that one sentence, and then I'll continue on. We really don't have a break of communication, which is pretty good, but you have to have really good interpreters for this. You can't have like an amateur interpreter, trying to do this stuff. And also, one thing that people really have a hard time maybe understanding is, you could take a civilian interpreter off the street, but you have to teach this interpreter military terminology, language, and they have to understand how to formally structure this when you're talking to students. And that's one thing when I'm talking to students, just to help out my interpreter as well. I don't use military acronyms. So if I would say like MDMP, I would say if you're going to work on the military decision-making process, right? I would never say like MDMP because it's an acronym, something you can't use because the Ukrainians will be like, MDMP? Yeah, like, what's that? So you have to have a good interpreter that understands all these fundamental things. It's not just about the language. It's about the military terminology. It's about, understanding what is being taught. Like when I'm working with these interpreters that we have, I have to brief these guys before we start training. And what I'll do is I'll take my book, and especially if it's hard to understand terms, we'll go through the class and then I'll be like, okay, these are the terms that I'm talking about here. I just want to make sure you understand what those terms are. And I'll ask them, is there anything else that you don't understand so we can make ourselves perfectly clear? Another thing that we do, we use these big whiteboards, right? And what we'll do is we'll write English in small letters so I can turn around and look at the whiteboard just for my cliff notes. And then we'll write it in Ukrainian right below that. So it's English, Ukrainian, and we can do all the way down. We do the same thing for everything that we do, and it makes things a lot more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're actually working on these very cool things that we're getting from the print shop. And we're taking the most commonly used courses that we teach, and we're actually like getting them the size of the whiteboard, laminated. It's going to have step-by-step, because that's how we do it. It's all step-by-step when we talk through battle drills and all those kind of things. And then just have a little bit on the other side so we can write on with notes. But the thing is, we'll be perfectly prepared when we show up. We just put it on the whiteboard. We already know It's exactly the way we're going to teach the class. And if we have to write notes, we just get it on the other side. So that's some of the ways that we deal with these challenges that you're talking about. It works out pretty good.
What do guys come back with stories, and do they come back and be like, yeah, you know that technique about throwing a grade not against the wall in front of you that saved us? Do they come back with either, you know, feedback, but what stories have you heard where they're like, yeah, you know, stupid Russians, we did this, and what kind of stories come back to you?
I've had many friends that I've met that have come back from the combat line, and they've thanked us, guys that we've trained. They've personally thanked us. You know, the brigade that I worked with earlier this little while back here, I actually trained one of the platoon leaders of their platoons. We trained the entire platoon, by the way. I'm just putting that in perspective. He went down to a not very good area, and he lost a lot of his guys, but there was one thing that we taught him, and that was with artillery, you know, to kind of stay out of the open, find a place to go, you know, get down, do what you got to do, get your men in a position. He hid in like a drainage ditch, and until the artillery stopped, and it actually saved his life. And you know, there was a lot of guys that were fresh that didn't get those kind of perspectives. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, bad things happen with artillery. It's very sad. But we've had guys come back to us and thank us for training. And I've seen guys that we've trained with, you know, 6 months, a year down the road. And, you know, I walk up to these guys and I'm sitting there across the field and I'm looking at these guys. I'm like, wait a second. I know that guy. And then he looks at me and he does kind of the same thing. And then he kind of runs over. He's like, hey, Tough, how you doing? Just gives me a big hug and stuff. So it's a really good feeling to know, like, that what we do here actually does help, and that, you know, it helps people come back home. And that's really what we're here for. So.
And you kind of touched on the 9 and 90 day rule. Like if you survive 9 days, your probability of overall survival goes up really high. And then again at 90 days, if you survive 90 days, your probability, you know, goes up again. There's 2 inflection points of survival on the battlefield. What do they tell you, any crazy stories? Because people always tell me the craziest stories, like hand throwing TM62 landmines over trenches, like shit like that you would never imagine actually is going on. But there's some crazy stuff going on all the time.
Usually when we're working with the battle brigades, we get some experienced soldiers there, and, you know, we're teaching the classes, and, you know, I'll sit there and I see a guy over there. He's like, no, that's not how we do it. And I was like, okay, sir. Tell me how you do it. And, you know, he's like, oh yeah, landmine. Yeah, we just shoot it. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
No, you don't like do grappling hook throws. You don't like try to clear it any other way. No. Just get it out of the way. You know,
yeah.
No special tools, no stuff like that. But just, and I'm sitting there like, and this is just one thing, man. I could go on for a long time like this, but and then we get the hypotheticals too. Like, okay, you're teaching us how to flank this position. What if they got landmines everywhere, Terminators and all kinds of other stuff? I'm like, dude, we're just teaching you the hypothetical basics and the theory.
The basics, yeah.
Yeah, I understand that you got a lot of experience, and what you're saying is very relevant, but we need to get the rest of the platoon up to the same level as you.
Right.
All right,
and
so...
There's the muscle memory things. You got to have the muscle memory things first. How to assault a trench, so you don't use up that brain space thinking about the fundamentals. You use it to adapt to unusual situations. Like, I am completely flanked on both sides by anti-personnel mines. I'm canalized into this. Like, what do I do next? You can't be thinking about, how do I shoot my gun? How do I, you can't be thinking, how do I use the radio? Like, those are muscle memory things. And yeah, we've all seen the videos of the Ukrainians and the Russians shooting anti-tank mines, from like 50 meters away. or my favorite is using a long stick to beat the butterfly mines, the little baby anti-personnel mines. They'll just smack those with a stick. They don't even care.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah.
even register those anti-personnel mines. They don't even register those as a threat.
Mhm.
They just beat it with a stick, and it's like a firecracker to them, but it'll take your half your leg off, if you stepped on one. Ridiculous. But yeah, I'm sure you've got a lot. I hope you're capturing all the weird stories as long, with the training and the lessons learned,
Mhm.
because I have so many weird stories. I don't even know what to do with them. Like Russian amphetamine use on the front lines in Bakhmut. I have so many stories about that and the crazy things that the Russians would do after getting hyped up on some of these drugs and just rush across an open space like a kill zone continually for like 30 minutes. And the Ukrainians are like, we didn't have enough bullets. We had more Russians to kill than we had bullets to shoot them with. Stuff like that. Crazy stories.
Yeah, I've heard about that. It reminds me of the time because I was with Big Red 1 back in 03 and 04 in Iraq, Ramadi and Fallujah. And we ran into a lot of these guys that were doing drugs, and had a guy with a PK machine gun walking down the street, didn't give a damn about anything, just shooting away. And he's getting hit. I've seen videos of this too. Guys getting hit under these drugs and just get hit and just keep coming and keep shooting. And I've heard stories here from soldiers in Ukraine, the same thing going on with these Russians. And that would be a very scary thing. If I was an infantryman, and I'm shooting at a guy and I'm hitting him 3-4 times, he's not going down, I would say, what the hell too.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's videos of the POWs, the Ukrainians capture these Russians, and they are still, they've been awake for 24 hours still after being captured, and they're just sitting in the corner shaking, because they're coming down off these drugs. So it's a fact. I mean, the Russians do it. Let's talk about, I don't want to get you in trouble. I'm curious about ITARs. So the International Traffic in Arms Regulation. There is a clause in there that I don't want to say prohibits, but addresses U.S. expertise in war, those individuals training foreign armies. And because a friend of mine asked me to help recruit special forces guys here to train, at the time it was to train the Chechens, the good Chechens in Ukraine. And so I asked a couple of my special forces friends, I'm like, how much would it cost you to do this? Would you do this? And first of all, they're like, you can't afford us. Like their contracting costs were like, the Ukrainians couldn't afford them. It was like $20,000 a month was the going rate. And I'm like, holy shit. But they also said the second thing was, we can't do it because of ITARs. It's illegal. Basically, it was what they told me. And I'm not a legal specialist. Do you have any considerations about that? Do you have any issues with that?
Yeah.
Has anybody ever told you?
I actually did check with a couple people that I know in the U.S. Army, especially. I know a couple guys still. And I also checked with Department of State. That applies. ITARs applies for two different things. Number one, if you're a paid individual, right? That means if you make money. Yeah. We make zero money. So we're totally exempt on that. Number two, teaching classified information. Okay. So if you're teaching anything that's like unrestricted or unclassified, or what would we call that? What would be the classification for that? I believe it's
sensitive but unclassified,
for public release.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't apply in that stuff, because you can find that stuff on the internet and anybody can read it and teach it.
Yeah.
Now, when you start talking about specific things, like, okay, we start talking about weapon systems. We start talking about, like, how to fire a Patriot missile system or something like that.
Or even
some of
even
these
a
guys.
Bradley autocannon. I mean, that
Yeah,
stuff is
Bradley. Yeah,
sensitive.
Bradley.
Yeah.
We don't do any of that stuff. The
Oh,
only the
that's
only
good.
vehicles we're working with here is the Ukrainian vehicles, and most of them are all BMPs or BTRs or BRDMs or stuff like that. That's the difference there. There have been guys that have come here and wanted to do like contracts and stuff like that. Uh,
Right.
that's when you get in trouble.
Sure.
That's when those rules apply.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I didn't want to get you in trouble. I was prepared to edit that out. If it went south, I was going to cut that out of the podcast. But so let me get this straight. Let me just summarize, and you correct me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
You guys are unpaid volunteers who are training the Ukrainians, and from what you tell me, it's more in-depth training because you can spend longer time with the Ukrainian units than those units that go over to Germany or France for 6 weeks and then come back. It seems like you give them more of a customized experience for their unit. So you may be, and I don't have any data to support this, but you may be better at training than the foreign training grounds in Poland now, Germany, France, and the UK. What is the controversy here? Who has a problem with this and why? Because I know you mentioned some of the stuff in your Twitter account that there are people that have a problem with this. It sounds like complete war bliss as far as training goes. For the Ukrainians, who would have a problem with this, and why do you think they have an issue?
Well, the first things first, let's answer your question in a multiple chunk way here. So number one, yeah, you're probably right about that because we spend, just for example, this last unit, we spent about 8 weeks with these guys, which is a pretty good chunk of time. That's not normal. It could be more, it could be less. We don't give like 1-day classes, okay? We're not teaching like TECCC or like room clearing for 1 day. When we go to these brigades and these units, we're out there and we're teaching for at least 3 or 4 weeks, even longer. We've worked with some brigades that have wanted our assistance for up to 5 months. We've worked with them. So yeah, the one thing I will say, and I don't really want to say this too much, but we were training a unit in the Marines, and they had half of the unit with us, and they sent half of the unit over to the UK to train. And we were doing it concurrently. When that unit came back from the UK, the battalion commander, I was sitting in the room with the battalion commander, the company commander that was sent over there came in there and just started screaming at the battalion commander. This training we got in the UK was garbage. We spent a week assembling, disassembling, and learning how to do functions check on an AK. Like they didn't understand this kind of stuff, all this other stuff. I'm not going to really go into detail about that because I don't want to do that for OPSEC reasons.
Yep.
But we had about a 30-minute long conversation with my translator, and battalion commander turns over and looks at me and he says, "We need to retrain these guys." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yes, sir, of course." So it's not because they do a bad job. Look, these guys are over there giving their all for the Ukrainians. They're doing an outstanding job, trying to do the best they can. I wrote an article on this, I think it was like a week or two ago, talking about the training over there. This has to be a Ukrainian-led mission. All right. Whenever we went over to advise anybody working with like what I did in the service, either working with the ICDC or when I was in Africa, I worked with J37 and the staff. We would work with like the Ethiopian, Djiboutian, Kenyan, armies and stuff like that. We would provide the resources for training and support. The people that were actually doing the training was the officers and the non-commissioned officers of that army. Because it comes down to a simple thing. You can train somebody on basic training, but you can't train them on the culture of an army. You can't train them on the way that armies run. All the aspects of what an army is. Our basic training in America is different than how Ukrainians do basic training. It would be like taking American soldiers, sending them to Ukraine to do basic training and sending them back to the United States. You can already understand how that would go. It wouldn't be the optimum solution to a problem. I've always said this, and I've said it very well. Instead of us outsourcing training to these training camps outside Ukraine, we shouldn't be investing in the Ukrainian training system. We should be giving them money for training. We should be giving them money for training simulators, training aids, these kind of things. We should be investing experts and specialists to go to these academies to train Ukrainian instructors to a very high standard. That way, all of those things actually stay in Ukraine, and it's a force multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
When we send people overseas to a different base camp or something like that, it's a Band-Aid. All right. We're outsourcing all of that experience. We're outsourcing all of that stuff that we could bring into Ukraine, and we're putting it somewhere else. And I understand what people are saying about that too. People say, well, Ukraine's a dangerous place. You know, these training camps get hit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a way to deal with that as well. We have to decentralize our training program. We have to put, instead of having, entire training camps with, hundreds and hundreds of soldiers in them, we need to have 100 training camps with company-sized elements that do the same thing. That way we decentralize these camps. We make it so that it's impossible for the Russians to destroy them. If they hit one or two, there's no way they can mess with the network. So my opinion on that.
Yeah, Syrskyi, didn't he decree that all training must be done underground? And then he recently backtracked on that. He's like, okay, maybe I was drunk. That was fairly recent. But yeah, it is a pain in the ass to get everybody over there for 6 weeks, even to Poland.
Mm-hmm.
That is even too arduous, I think. The juice is not worth the squeeze, in my opinion. And plus, you take people out of the fight. It goes either one of two ways, from my opinion. Either you take people out of the fight that are too valuable to lose at the time and send them to a foreign country for 6 weeks and then come back, which is detrimental to the defense. Or you send people that are not value added because they're available for training. And those people go over to the foreign countries. And then when they come back, you still don't use them because they're for whatever reason, you weren't using them before, either experience or they're injured or sickly, or, they're staff officers that are never going to, get within 50 kilometers of the front. So yeah, in my opinion, I think training in Ukraine is way better. Again, there's some limitations to that. And the reason why there's not a lot of, that going on is probably two things, in my opinion. And tell me where I'm wrong here. Okay. The first one is pretty straightforward. Foreign countries will not have trainers in Ukraine, period. Right? Officially.
No, absolutely
That's
not.
straightforward. No problem. The other one's a little squishy. Ukraine is, I'm not going to say they are our tracksuit gold chain wearing mafia bunch of corrupt, just a den of corruption, but a lot of that money just disappears. And Western countries, especially the United States, are weary of throwing cash into a system that they know is inherently corrupt. And so that has limited. What Ukraine needs more than anything is money, whether it's strategic attack for building flamingos, whether it's training, whether it's building their own 155 mobile, guns. They need pure cash the most. And that is what Westerners are very cautious, don't want to do that because of just pure corruption.
I can understand that, but I really don't want to comment on that. That's not my place, and I've never personally seen it myself, so I can't really comment on that. But I do think, just like we were talking before, that we need to invest. If we're going to invest in Ukraine, we need to invest in capabilities so that they can continue to use those capabilities. If we outsource those capabilities, like training, we're not going to train instructors. We're not going to build up training centers here in Ukraine that they can use for future use. We're not going to build up their capability of training soldiers to a higher standard and a higher level. And the last thing about this is, we're putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound that needs to be fixed. So I would definitely say that a lot of this money that's going overseas for this training needs to come here. And we need to work with the Ukrainians. And we don't have to send people here. We can have people on voice VTC calls. We could send delegates back to Poland and have conferences and stuff like that. You can even have a specialized instructor training school in Poland if that's what you want to do. But the thing is, like, the Ukrainians should be leading training on their own, and they should be writing the training syllabus. They should be leading the way on the training. And even if we send guys over to these training centers, Ukrainians should be in the lead and we should be in support.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it should be, because they understand the war, and they understand how things are done here, and they understand what it takes to train these guys to fight, win, and survive. So, my opinion on that.
Well, Brad, it's
your last thing here.
Yeah, go ahead.
We didn't cover one question.
Okay.
So your last thing, you talk about why a lot of people have a problem with what we do here. Look, I don't know. And honestly, there's a million people on the internet that want questions immediately, and you need to validate yourself. No, I don't need to validate myself for a couple different reasons. Number one, a lot of this is operational security. All right. We can't talk about what we do here, the mission, who we're working with, the units that we're working with, and all these other kind of things. There's no battalion or brigade commander that wants to go out there and go, yeah, I'm working with an American out here. My training center is at location XYZ 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because the Russians are just going to nail it.
Yeah.
And, I'm told, and I just want to make this perfectly clear, I'm told what I can and can't say, and who I can and can't say, who I work with and who I haven't. Because there's some organizations that don't want people to know that information. Sure. So, it's not on us to prove or validate what we do of any false allegations. It's on them. And they can have fun doing that. There's pictures, video all over our X showing us doing training. There's training certificates from some of these units that have told me I'm allowed to post these things up. There's orders from these colonels, and you're a senior officer. Would you just sign a letter to somebody if they weren't an official person to come on your training ground to do training, to train your guys and have authority to do that?
Of course not. Yeah.
Of course not. So I think that answers that question quite well, Anthony.
I think so. And I'm going to put the website on the show notes, and it's tcagukraine.org. Is that correct? tcagukraine.
I believe so. I'll check that with you. I don't really run the website too much. We got guys in the States doing that. So
okay, well, I'll make sure that that's correct, and I'll put that in the show notes. Brad, it seems like you're doing a service to Ukraine, and clearly you're doing a service to the West, although not everyone appreciates the defense of Ukraine as a Western imperative. But in fact, you are, by training the Ukrainians, you are serving the United States and Europe, in my opinion. So thank you for what you do, and thanks for your time. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anthony. It's been a blast talking to you, my brother.
Good chat. Bye-bye.
The Flash Traffic Podcast.